What is up, and welcome back to 24 Minutes of A24, the podcast that takes a look at the A24 library 24 minutes at a time. I'm Ethan Simi, and there's no Ben Lawhorn this week on the pod. And look, since Ben's not here, I'm going to throw him under the bus a little bit, and he did not get to watching the movie this week, so I booted him off the show. And instead, we've got returning guest Bryan Sudfield. Bryan, welcome to the pod. Thanks for taking Ben's spot. I'm so glad to have you here.
You know what? If there's anyone to replace Ben, I'm happy to be Ben's replacement just for the day. I'm very excited to be here again. Thank you for inviting me back on to talk about this very, very, very exciting new film from A24.
Absolutely, man. This week on the show, we are dreaming about crocodiles and talking about zebras and getting ourselves into some really weird sexual situations as we talk about the latest A24 movie, Dream Scenario. Now, this movie is starring Nic Cage, and it is interesting. There's a lot to talk about. I'm really interested in it. Real fast, before we start talking about the film itself, I have a little bit of housekeeping to do, and I realize that I've broken protocol here with how we do the show because I didn't have the logline for the movie ready. So let me tell you real quick. A hapless family man finds his life turned upside down when millions of strangers suddenly start seeing him in their dreams. When his nighttime appearances take a nightmarish turn, Paul is forced to navigate his newfound stardom. Can we do housekeeping real fast, Bryan? Are you okay with that before we jump in?
Sure, of course.
Okay, all right. I just have one piece of A24 thing to talk about. Now, Oppenheimer is a big deal. People who listen to the show know I love Oppenheimer. Where are you at on Oppenheimer, Bryan?
It's my number 3 of the year.
All right. I love to see it. I'm glad. This is even bigger reason why I'm glad you're on this episode, because you can appreciate this piece of news here. Earlier this week, Christopher Nolan came out and praised A24. He said, "There wasn't a distributor as effective as A24 when I started out, who was putting out all kinds of incredible and challenging movies on a very regular basis. They do an amazing job." I think that's pretty cool, to be honest. I think that's exciting to hear from someone like Christopher Nolan.
Oh, absolutely. When I saw this piece of news float around the internet, I got very excited because, you know, if anyone's opinion matters nowadays, Christopher Nolan's opinion does kind of matter, regardless of what people think of him. So for him to come out and praise A24, that's a really exciting thing to see.
Absolutely. And I think it's great for A24 too, because Scorsese recently came out and talked about A24 and kind of had some praises for it as well. So these big legendary legacy directors are that are in the spotlight, really, and going to continues to be in the spotlight with the Oscar season coming up, are, you know, singing the praises of A24. I think that's really, really exciting and cool stuff. And Oppenheimer, the 4K disc is just sold out everywhere.
Yeah.
Did you get a copy?
I haven't been able to get a copy yet.
Wow.
To be honest, I haven't gone out shopping these last few weeks, and you know, I need to go Criterion shopping before the sale ends. So I'm definitely going to try to find it here. Living in New Jersey, I feel like it'll be easy to find a copy of Oppenheimer, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see.
You make me nervous. I hope that you didn't just jinx yourself, man.
I know. I probably did, but you know what? It is what it is.
Well, Ben so graciously went to a couple of Best Buys the morning that it came out in search of the Steelbook for me. I'm a much bigger fan of the film than Ben is. I also went to a Best Buy. So he went to his in Salt Lake City. I went to mine in Portland. I was one of like 4 people lined up literally when Best Buy opened to get Oppenheimer, like a complete psychopath.
That's nuts.
It's insane. And they didn't have the Steelbook at mine. They didn't have it at either location that Ben went to. And I ended up getting the 4K. I got one of the copies before it literally was gone within like a minute of getting there. And I think it's fascinating, this like resurgence that Oppenheimer is kind of creating in a physical media world. And then to have Christopher Nolan come out and talk about A24, I think that's a very cool link that's happening, you know, socially right now.
Absolutely. It's pretty crazy when you think about how physical media has been kind of on the decline these last few years, especially with the pandemic and the rise of streaming. So for the fact that this movie specifically is hard to find a physical copy of, that's crazy. You would think that maybe Barbie could have been difficult to find a physical copy of, but you could easily find Barbie. This, though, I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. I'm not surprised at the same time, but it is really exciting. It gives me somewhat hope for physical media in the coming weeks and years and what have you. Hopefully, this isn't just a phase where it's popular for a certain period of time, then it just fizzles out once again. Hopefully, this is a wake up call to remind people that physical media is absolutely not dead.
And it sounds like Killers of the Flower Moon will be getting a 4K and a Blu-ray release as well. So that's really encouraging to see, and that's exciting. Of course, I'm sure both of us are going to try to own that. So
Oh yeah.
I'm with you. I think this is really good for like the physical media space, and I hope that it continues. And even if it was, which I don't think it was, but if it was like an artificial like shortage that Universal created, you've got to give them props because they knew what they had on their hands with this kind of 4K release. And I got to say, I know you don't have it, and we're off on an Oppenheimer tangent here, and we're going to cover Oppenheimer, I'm sure, during the Oscar season here on the show. So I'll talk about it more then, but this 4K edition, this like 4K resolution and transfer that Christopher Nolan has overseen is truly like transcendent to get that type of quality in your home. I was freaking out. The day that I bought it, I actually went to go see Napoleon, and then I came home and I had to put my children to bed, and then I started Oppenheimer probably at like 8:30 or 9 after I had had dinner, and I just did like basically the 3-hour back-to-back films because I was just like, I can't wait to watch this until tomorrow. I have to watch it tonight. Again, like a psychopath, but it felt really good, and I think it's fantastic. So very cool that Christopher Nolan is praising A24. Let's talk about Dream Scenario. This is the newest movie from A24, starring Nic Cage. Really cool premise. I think it's a really fascinating movie, and we'll break it down. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how you saw this movie, because you saw it before a lot of other people did?
Yeah, so I was lucky to attend TIFF a few months ago, and this was a film that had its world premiere there. I was strictly interested with Nicolas Cage being the lead and the premise. I tried going in not knowing really anything, and thankfully, since there wasn't a trailer out at that point or any footage, all there was just images. That letterbox header where it's Nic Cage looking and then the word loser is painted on the car in the background. That was the only piece of anything that was out before I stepped foot into the screen that I went to for this movie at TIFF. And I didn't get to attend the world premiere screen. I tried to, but it's very complicated. If you ever go to TIFF, just be mindful that standing in rush lines, you're either going to get lucky or you're not going to get lucky. This was unfortunately the time where I got super unlucky after waiting hours upon hours just to get in for this 100-minute long A24 Nicolas Cage film. And then I saw it the following morning at the press screen. And when you go to a press screen at a film festival, and I know that you covered New York, so you've got your fair share of film festival press screens and what have you. But at TIFF, it's definitely more wild and energetic than a New York Film Festival press screen. This was mobbed. It was at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and I was surprised that so many people came out to go see this movie. But the night before the screening is when it premiered, and everybody was praising it and celebrating it, calling it one of Nicolas Cage's best performances, one of his best films, a great outing from A24. And yeah, I saw the movie at TIFF back in September, and I unfortunately haven't been able to see it again since because, it hasn't come out here in Jersey yet at the time of this recording. Plus, it's just such a busy time of the year with all the Oscar contenders and so many films that I haven't seen and everything. But really, I'm just watching The Holdovers like 20 times. So
I can't blame you.
yeah, it's so good. But yeah, I went into the movie not knowing what to expect, and I walked out of it absolutely floored. It was one of my favorites of the entire festival. I saw nearly 30 films, and this was in my top 5 of the entire festival. I was really big on this film. There definitely are a few narrative problems with it. It's not perfect, but I think the concept is so freaking cool, like you were saying at the top. It's a very unique concept brought to life, in my opinion, very beautifully. And Nicolas Cage delivers not only one of the best performances from his career in recent memory, dare I say it's one of the best performances of his entire career. And at this point, Nicolas Cage is known for delivering these bombastically over the top, goofy, ridiculous performances. But every once in a while, he comes around and delivers a more nuanced, laid back, restrained performance. And yes, there's some over the top Nicolas Cage in this movie, but it's more so on the latter of how it's very restrained and laid back, which I really appreciate because, people are like, oh, Nicolas Cage is such a bad actor, but he's really not. When given the right
No.
material, he could pump out a great performance. I mean, look at what he did with Pig a few years ago. That
Right,
was an
right.
exceptional performance. You could say what you want about the film, and it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but that performance was arguably his best performance in a very long time, and this is on the same level of a great Nicolas Cage performance. I was a big, big, big fan of this movie. I really, really loved it, and it's right outside my top 10 of the year right now. That's how much I love this movie.
Wow. I love that. That's super cool. Yeah, you mentioned going to TIFF, and I think that's really cool that you got to see it basically with no context. I do think
Mhm.
that is a really unique experience. Obviously, not everybody gets to kind of go into it with that. I had seen a trailer, of course, this kind of images going around of this movie, but I will say when I went to New York and I only covered probably I think it was like 12 movies. It wasn't too many. I wasn't there too long, but I did get to see All of Us Strangers. Now that movie doesn't come out for about another month, and I had nothing to. I didn't even have. I got to see it before the trailer dropped, so I saw it in the morning.
Yeah.
Trailer came out later that afternoon, and that movie is in my top 5 of the year. And I think that does say something about going into a movie with little or no expectations of what you might encounter. And
Exactly.
Dream Scenario really is kind of the perfect movie for that to happen too, because you kind of just get to go along with the journey and you get to follow Nic Cage and like kind of his whimsy and his humor, but then is also, very nuanced and personable performance, like within kind of the cracks of that. Dream Scenario is directed by Christopher Borgli, and I wanted to point that out real fast because I watched his other film from last year called Sick of Myself. I watched that last night. Very much in the same vein of this, of like trying a very entertaining, over the top, exciting narrative structure to basically talk about major thematic elements that are going on in the culture right now. And so I think this director is really cool. So if you're looking for more things like Dream Scenario or Sick of Myself, these kind of go hand in hand. I will say I agree with you on the Nic Cage front of things. I do think he is kind of having this really exciting, prominent kind of renaissance that he's going through right now. Like the choosing the right projects in between the paycheck projects, and I think he's been pretty curt about that in the past. Of like, I had to pay for things, and like I had to pay for my house and like pay for the things that I owned, and that's what I needed to do, and like that's totally respectable. And now it seems like he's being able to kind of morph that a little bit into what might have been towards the beginning of his career of choosing certain things. I think he's excellent in this film. I think the narrative, like you mentioned, does have some issues, and I don't think everything works, but I do think it is one of the more entertaining movies of the year. I do think it's one of the more unique movies of the year, and one of the more thought-provoking movies as well. Like it is, Oppenheimer, Killers of the Flower Moon. These things are massive scaling epics that are grounded in real life history. Dream Scenario is not. It's just a fun kind of fiction flick. So I think there's something to be said for that as well. We are going to talk about spoilers. So this is kind of your spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Dream Scenario yet and you don't want to be spoiled, go check it out first. Come back to this episode and then listen to our thoughts. Because I do think it's a movie that's better to go into unspoiled. I was lucky enough to see this movie at my local theater, and I actually saw it with my wife. So Ben knows and listeners know, I don't get the chance to see movies with my wife very often because it's, she either has to watch our kids or has to stay home with them while they're sleeping or whatever the case may be. We were kidless for like 24 hours. So we decided to go see this movie. We got popcorn and peanut M&Ms and beer, and it truly was just a delightful time at the cinema. Like, that sounds so nerdy, but this movie is perfect for that. And I think it is actually releasing at a really positive time because it's coming out just before the big award sweep of May, December, and Maestro and Poor Things, and all of these things coming out within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So I think it found this really cool niche spot to be released. What do you think of Ari Aster as a producer on this film. Ari Aster and A24, they're very synonymous now, and of course he's got his fingerprints on this. Seems pretty easy to tell. What did you think about that?
You could definitely see some stamps of Ari Aster throughout this movie. I think there was actually a point where he was supposed to direct this, if I'm not mistaken. He was actually like in consideration to direct this film and what have you. But I think that and this may be a bit of a hot take. I don't know if it is, but
Okay.
this was the better Ari Aster A24 film from this year.
Sure,
I wasn't very high on Beau Was Afraid. I was actually very disappointed with it, but you could definitely feel some of Ari Aster's stamps here, and I think this is the first major film that he's producing that obviously isn't a film that he directed, and I could see it. I could see why he would want to produce something like this. Very surreal, very thought-provoking, very mind-bending entertainment. I feel like this is the perfect film to produce. And plus, he's had such a great relationship with A24. They distributed all 3 of his directorial outings so far. So it makes sense why he's attached to this. So I had no complaints about him behind the camera as a producer. It would have been very interesting to see what he would have done if he had directed this.
Yeah.
But I like that he had his name attached to this. I like that a lot.
I do too. And you can really feel his fingerprints on this. You can really feel his kind of his producer credit, kind of steering things behind the scenes a little bit and like figuring out when to maybe dive into a darker side or a more kind of character analytical side of things, and then when to break that up and do something else. This and Beau Was Afraid are the only 2 full-length films that he has produced. So I think that's really interesting. It does beg the question of like, what maybe in an alternate universe, like what would A24 be without Ari Aster? I don't know if that's a conversation for now, but I think it's an important question to ask because they really are starting this. I mean, they have had a relationship, but now that he has produced the film for them, I think it's going to kick off a lot of things because he understands the quote unquote brand and the energy and the vibe and like what A24 kind of defines itself by. And this movie really does kind of fall into that bucket. And I think it worked really well for this situation. It is like, it's kind of like Beau Was Afraid, but it's kind of like the complete opposite because it is essentially based on dreams, and it is a much smaller scale character and thematic like analyzation of what our dreams mean, maybe. And I think that's pretty cool, especially for Ari Aster to maybe come down off of Beau Was Afraid, which I'm definitely due for a rewatch. Have you seen it again, or have you only seen it once?
No, I've only seen it the one time.
Okay,
I'm
me
not
too.
sure if I'm ready to go back to it anytime soon. Not the 3-hour film from this year that I have any desire of rewatching again.
Yeah, if I'm going to spend 3 hours watching a movie, it's probably going to be one of the several other films that have come out this year. I wanted to talk about, and again, we're in full spoilers, so I did want to talk about kind of the cameo, quote unquote, like the Nicholas Braun
yes,
showing up in this movie. I was just astounded. I was so happy. I couldn't express to you like what that meant to me. I was like, that's Cousin Greg. That's my boy on the big screen. We're back in an A24 movie. It just felt right, and I loved every second of it.
Yeah, sitting at the press screen for this movie, again, like, nothing had come out about the movie. I don't think that I'm sure someone had tweeted a spoiler of this cameo after the world premiere screen. So naturally, like, I didn't realize that there was going to be a cameo in this. And then, I mean, to be honest, I didn't really look up the cast. The only person that I knew was in this was Nicolas Cage. Like, I didn't know that Julianne Nicholson was playing his wife, and I didn't know that Michael Cera at some point was going to come in. But yeah, the cameo of Nicholas Braun was just so wild to me because obviously Succession just wrapped up a few months ago, so that's still very fresh in my memory, as it is probably for a lot of other people. So seeing him in this was very euphoric. It was very surreal seeing him in this. And especially the sequence that they put him in, I'm like, you know what? I think it fits. I think it fits. Does. it absolutely fits. It's just like, it's literally just Cousin Greg in some other capacity, but Yeah,
Yeah.
I basically was similar to you. My friend who I saw with my friend who was sitting next to me at the press screen, I was just like, "Oh my fucking god, it's cousin Greg!" Like, and I literally heard someone in our screen go, "Cousin Greg!"
Yeah, totally. Like, and I wanted to do that, and I was freaking out. And my wife hasn't seen Succession, so I was like, "This is a big deal. This is like, come on, we're this is a big deal." And I do think he is in like the right part of the movie. I think that's a great cameo. You mentioned Michael Cera, Kate Berlant is in this movie, who is in another A24 project recently, a comedy special. So I think there's a lot of cool little knickknacks about this movie, and that is part of what makes it kind of so fun. Let's get into the true cinema, so that way we can maybe talk more about the cameo. We can talk more about Michael Cera and kind of work our way through this movie. Now, if we're being transparent and honest, which we both strive to be honest people, on or off the pod. It has been. I saw this a week ago, but I've seen a lot of things since then. One of those movies in between seeing this movie and recording this podcast was Come and See, the 1985 war movie. So I'm very consumed with that I watched. That really took a lot of my brain space to like try to intake that film. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend like seeking that out. It is absolutely one of the most like distraught movies like in existence, probably. You saw this a few months ago, so we're going to use this as an exercise to kind of like recall our memory a little bit and spark what we remember about the movie. But I think it'll be a very interesting exercise because it will kind of come to fruition of like what things stuck and maybe what things didn't stick and what does work and what doesn't work about the film. So we'll start kind of in the very beginning of the film. Nic Cage is a loser. Like, he is a tenured professor at this university. He's got nothing published. He's got nothing going on in his life. He's kind of just like a kind of a dumb dude, like just a dud of a guy. And we kind of first get introduced to him when he is going to meet someone, another professor, really, for like lunch. And his wife wants him to record the conversation. We don't really know where this is headed, but he's kind of confronting this person about maybe like stealing his idea and being published with that. Do you remember the ant thing? Like, it was a really good pun with ants, and it worked, and it was funny, and I don't remember the word, but it worked very well.
I don't remember that at all. I do remember the scene, but I don't remember specifically what was said in that scene.
No, I know. So I like the scene. I think it's a great introduction because it does act a little bit of a puzzle piece to try to figure out what is this, who is this guy, and what is he doing in his life, and what's his motives and things. But I wanted to shout out to the editing, especially the sound editing in this scene is pretty cool because we hear him listening to the recording of the conversation that had just taken place in his car. But while we're listening to that audio, we see the real-time conversation happening in the restaurant. And I thought that was a pretty neat, just like a little entertainment hack to try to like kind of keep the audience on their toes. And he ends up deleting the conversation, and things don't really go his way at all. And it really just solidifies this dude is kind of just like kind of rock bottom. What were your thoughts like the first time we see Nic Cage on screen? You think he was good, kind of like fulfilling that end of the spectrum of like, this guy is a loser?
Oh, 100%. I mean, if there's anyone that could play a loser and a winner really well, it's him. I mean, I just like the look of him too. I mean, look at the haircut and the beard and everything. I mean, the glasses and the outfits, he literally nails down this whole mild-mannered college biology professor beautifully. I mean, it was a role that was so tailor-made for him. And, before how I talked about how Ari Aster was in consideration to direct this, apparently when that was the case, Adam Sandler was in consideration for the role. But then Christoph saw... Ari saw Christoph's previous film and wanted him to direct this instead, and then Christoph wanted Nicolas Cage for the role instead. Not that Adam Sandler would have been bad, but like, you can't really picture anyone else but Nicolas Cage in this role. And I mean, he nailed it perfectly. I mean, like I said at the top, like, it's a great performance from him, and just like he nailed the look of the character of, what was his name? Paul? Yeah, Paul Matthews. Like, he nailed the look of that guy. He really knocked it out of the park.
really average name too, just like
Average name.
just plain Joe name, just like a kind of a plain looking guy. And I do want to back up for just a second because the real kind of like the this cold open, if you will, that we get is actually a dream. We see his daughter kind of start to float, and we're snapped out of that dream pretty fast, and we kind of enter this family aesthetic going around of, oh, that's weird. I didn't do anything to help you. Why wouldn't I help you? And so we are introduced to this dream phenomenon from the very, very start. And what I think is very interesting, and we'll kind of walk through this, is every time that he is in somebody's dream, at least until they kind of switch over to nightmares, he is a hapless, helpless stander by, essentially. He is full of inaction. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts, because the more that I think about this and try to process maybe what is being said or translated or communicated about what this means, I think it can fall in like one of two camps. I think like maybe he is actually that, and that's how everybody views him, right? Because it is other people's dreams. And so they just recognize a really average guy who would not step in to help or save someone from being attacked by crocodiles. But then the flip side of that, I wonder too if that is some projection of how he views himself, or maybe not even how he views himself, but how he doesn't want to be viewed by other people. Like that is his kind of his nightmare, if you will, of like, because he asks several times, like, why am I not helping? Why am I not doing anything? Why am I just standing watching these things transpire around me? And I think that's a really key question of like, do our dreams constitute like who we want to be, who we currently are, who we might have been in the past? Like, where does that fall on the spectrum? I think there's a lot to unpack there, but it's pretty fun to think about.
No, absolutely. It is interesting to pose a question like that because, yeah, throughout the movie, he talks about how he doesn't really want to, like, be a public figure. Like, he talks about that early on in the movie. Once he starts to learn that everyone is dreaming about him, for better or worse. And it is interesting, too, because some people, I would think the people that have dreamt of him, some of them do actually know who the real Paul is, and they know that he's not exactly the most extroverted, outgoing person. So yeah, him just standing there and not really doing anything, just basically being a bystander of like when his daughter floats in the air in the beginning of the movie, or when alligators come up, or when there's like a whole earthquake or disaster happening in the classroom. It is interesting, but then there are people who hadn't met Paul who dream of him doing other things, and I'm sure we'll get into those specific dreams later on, but it is interesting to see how, it could be looked at in so many different ways. That's the beautiful thing about this movie. It leaves the audience interpreting their own feelings about these dreams and the character of Paul and everything else surrounding them. But it's a tough question to answer if like that's who he really is, or if people are just dreaming of him doing that. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I think that's part of what makes this movie really Ari Aster coded, is like that kind of idea and that like quandary of trying to figure out what that does mean. Next thing I wanted to talk about, meeting his old girlfriend at a show. Him and his wife go to a show. He is stopped outside by an old girlfriend, and she basically breaks it. And this is a very funny scene that it kind of incorporates like this him and his wife and this ex-girlfriend and this weird uncomfortable animosity kind of between the two women, and like why Paul would give his number, and like why he would agree to meet her later on, and things like this. So I think that part really worked of this scene, but he does give her his number because she tells him like, I've been dreaming about you. And that again does open up this interesting conversation with him and his wife of like, oh, what do you think she's been dreaming about? I want to kind of use this as a segue into a couple of different thoughts. My first thought is, and this kind of goes into the next scene, I didn't have it written down here, but when they're talking in bed of like people dreaming about him, and like they're kind of getting a little spicy with each other, and I think it's very sweet and hilarious, and also completely sad that this really average guy is just trying to spark a flame with his wife. And It has to. And the only thing that we know that has gotten him to this point is like other people's dreaming about him. I just think that's really funny. And we are definitely not given a reason as to why this happens. Do you have any thoughts? Like, have you thought about like, oh, I wonder why this happened on a pragmatic level? I kind of just accepted it and I was just like, oh, this is cool. And I think it works narratively, but I think, it's interesting to maybe think about.
I'm in the same boat as you.
Yeah.
I struggled to really figure out why this was even happening in the first place. But, throughout the movie, I'm just like, I'm enjoying this. I don't need any explanation of why this is happening, what's going down, and what have you. Because I feel like if we were explained what was going on, it would ruin the movie. At least for me. I don't need to be spoon-fed everything with movies. And I understand that some people could walk into a movie and be like, I wish they could tell me everything that's going down and what have you. But
Yeah.
I don't think we need answers, especially for a movie like this, because, again, it leaves the audience determining, why is this happening? Why is this the person that is floating around in all these people's dreams? Like, why him specifically?
Mhm.
But, echoing off that sequence with his wife, they're trying to have this nice spark and everything. It's a very sweet and intimate scene. And then all of a sudden, it's like in the back of the head, when the ex-girlfriend did come up to him and his wife at the show and everything, I was just sitting back in my seat, just like feeling so bad for Julianne Nicholson's character Janet. I was just like, I'm like, oh my god, you're just standing there while this ex-girlfriend of your husband is like, I had dreams about you, Paul.
It's so uncomfortable.
You just keep coming in my dreams, and it's like, what do you even say in that moment? How do you react in that moment?
Yeah.
How would you react if someone came up to you, your significant other, and said, I've been dreaming about you? I don't know how I would react. I'd probably flip out.
Yeah, it is strange to think about for sure. I think I just find it incredibly funny that the first thing, and I think he suggests it, but like the first thing he says to her is like, oh, do you think she dreamed about me naked? And it's just like, my guy, Paul, we got to tone it down, dude. Let's think about, you got to get strategic about what you're talking to your wife about. You can't just like jump into the deep end here. But I do think like narratively, if we are given why this is happening, we have a much different 2.5 hour character study on our hands. It is not a 100-minute Nic Cage romp. Like I think it is a completely different film if we tackle those things. Next on the list, the dream montage. He realizes he starts to be in everybody's dreams. He's interviewed by the news. He starts to go really viral. He goes to class to give a lecture, as we've seen him do prior to this. And there's a ton of people, and he's like, oh, is everybody here for my lecture? And everybody raises their hands, of course, because they want to be there because they're all dreaming about him. And then he can't help himself, which I think is part of what makes him so innocent and kind of cute, is like, he can't help himself. He loves this allure of being in everybody's dreams, and this allure of fame and the spotlight for such an average, ordinary guy. And he's like, who dreamed about me? And everybody raises their hands. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll give you 5 minutes and we can answer some questions. And of course that goes on for probably like a 10-minute montage of like, what did you dream about? What did you dream about? What did you dream about? And this again like harkens the point of, in every single dream he was just a passerby and he just stood and watched. I loved this montage. I think we get some really neat visuals. Again, very Ari Aster coded, but some really cool stuff that continues what I think is a really nice pace for the movie. We kind of move through things pretty fast.
Yeah.
And it works. I like it a lot. Did you have a favorite dream that you can remember? I know we go through like a few of them. I think my favorite would be the blueberry mushrooms. They're like mushrooms that look like blueberry muffins, and some guy is like eating them in a field, but also being chased by a blood-dripped murderer. And
no, that one would be my favorite.
That's a good
one,
one,
right?
Right?
Be my favorite. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you get some really weird ones. I think they work really well, and it's pretty funny. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the end of really the first act, and things kind of start to change. He starts to get much more famous. His life gets much more complicated. And we really start to dive into and tackle this theme of like our modern day fame addiction and this overnight sensation, this TikTok viral situation that people find themselves in and are striving for on a continuous basis. This is where he meets with a company named Thoughts, which I thought was great. Some really funny blocking and visuals in this scene. This is Michael Cera and Kate Berlant kind of just cooking, to be honest. Like, they're kind of just having fun.
Oh yeah.
And I thought the scene was a little tedious and a little laborious and went on for a little bit long.
Mm-hmm.
But I also understand why we stood with it for so long. And they really try hard to pitch him Sprite. And they were like, look, if you're in everybody's dreams, if we can get everybody to dream about you drinking Sprite, then people are going to buy Sprite. Like, Sprite wants to do a deal with you.
Right.
And again, like, I think there's a lot of directions to go in this scene. It's entertaining, it's funny, but it also opens up the conversation of, like, the true commoditization of every fucking thing in our life and trying to pass that kind of echelon of, like, reality into dreams. And we'll kind of recircle and retackle that later, but this scene was great.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, while they're trying to pitch him to become a spokesperson for Sprite, he kind of tries to use this as an opportunity to get his book off the ground.
Right.
Something very important to bring up is that while Paul is a professor, a tenured professor, he's also someone that wants to publish stories. He wants to bring these stories to life. And he tries to use this, now that he's a big household name by appearing in everyone's streams, he wants to use this as a boosting point to get his book off the ground. But really, these PR people are just like, no, we want to use you to sell Sprite. We want you to do this. We want you to do that, which is very fitted because that's how a lot of these PR people are nowadays. They're so focused on trying to get the product out there. And it's like, you do this for us, but we're not going to do anything for you in return. So it's kind of like that. It's like that kind of scenario. And, you know, Paul's not exactly vibing with that, but in the long haul, he's appreciative of the fact that he's this big celebrity and he's capitalizing on his success, but he wants more than just being a spokesperson for Sprite. Although this did make me crave a Sprite right after I saw the movie.
Yes.
I'm not a soda guy. I don't drink soda. I'll admit that right now, but I'm not going to lie when I say that after my press screen for this, I did go online and get a Sprite.
Yeah. Isn't that so funny, though? That it's is. It fucking worked. They did it. Like, they made you want a Sprite, which I think is hilarious. And it really works. And, like, I think Michael Cera is really great in this scene, and he kind of does this, like, reset that he does where he's like, look, I lied to you. I haven't dreamed about this meeting. Let's just, like, reset. And he, like, turns around and stares out the window for a very uncomfortable amount of time for both Paul and the audience to be like, what are we doing now? Like, are you a weirdo? And, like, how are things kind of shaking out? And this is like this is the first time where Paul runs into Molly, and Molly is kind of the secretary that's been happening, played by Dylan Galula, I think is how you say her last name. She plays opposite in Shithouse, which was my favorite movie of 2020. I think more people need to watch Shithouse. That movie's just dynamite stuff. She basically tells him in an elevator ride up, and then after the meeting on an elevator ride down, like, hey, I dreamed about you. She says this going into the meeting, and then coming out, he kind of pokes and prods a little bit and is like, oh, you know, I hope I didn't do anything crazy in your dreams. And she's like, oh, you did, but, like, in that tone. And you can tell he's like, oh, okay, wow. Like, this, like, people might be dreaming about me in this very interesting sexual way and manner. And this leads into the bar scene. So much of this movie is uncomfortable and cringy and, like, unwielding, and the fact that it is that, and I respect it for that. But every moment of this, I was just like, Paul, my guy, you're a family guy. You got 2 daughters at home. You got to be careful, brother. And, like, he even knows it because he's like, oh, we our age, like, we shouldn't be hanging out, huh? And she's like, what do you mean by that? And, like, he really implies a lot. Shh. And then she continues to describe her dream. Before we talk about that, what did you think of his choice to go to the bar with her?
I was like, Paul, my brother, my guy, what are you doing,
My brother
man?
in Christ.
My brother in Christ. What are you doing, man? I mean, listen, like, fine. Maybe this will help boost your chances of
Sure.
doing something with the PR company, but like, just get a drink and then just go back to your hotel and leave. But
yeah,
and then she reveals the dream. What is the dream, Ethan? What is her dream?
She reveals basically that he is standing in a corner of her home in a very menacing manner.
Mm-hmm.
And she wakes up in the middle of the night, and or like when she's going to bed, she gets some water, and basically it's kind of this satire of like a Nightmare on Elm Street situation.
Yeah.
That she plays very satirical, which I appreciate. I thought was quite funny. She's like, "Oh, who's there? Please don't murder me." And he comes out of the shadows and basically sits down next to her and grabs her in some places and, her hair, and continues to very aggressively pursue her in a consensual situation, mind you. But the way she describes it is basically like, yeah, you made me wet. And he at that point, he was just like, whoa, like we're dealing with new worlds here that he obviously is not accustomed to based on what we know about him and his wife.
That's pretty much the gist of it. And literally, as she's describing it, he just randomly yells from the top of his lungs in a very funny way, "Check, please."
Yeah, it's so funny. It's so good. I really commend Nic Cage for like bringing his Nic Cage-ness to this role.
Absolutely.
He goes back to the hotel. He ends up pursuing this and living out this scene to the best that he can. This is hysterical. This scene is so funny.
One of the funniest scenes of the entire year for me. Hands down, one of the funniest scenes of the whole year.
1,000,000% agree. And as you get into this serious situation where you are contemplating Paul's decision to potentially ruin what he has fostered in his home and his children and his family life for the allures of this fame, this overnight fame that more people, are interested in him and do want him sexually. I think that's a very interesting, again, like commentary on our culture as well. He tries to replicate this, and when they're about to kiss, I'm pretty sure he just farts, and I didn't see it coming. And normally, fart jokes don't get me. That's just not my kind of humor.
Mm-hmm.
This rocked my world, and it was so funny, dude. It was incredible.
Oh my god, it was some of the hardest laughter that I had let out during the entirety of TIFF. It was some of the loudest laughter that I heard during the entirety of the festival. And again, keep in mind, this was at a press screen, so I can't imagine what it was like watching this with a public audience and everything. Yeah. And it's so funny because, like you, I'm also not a big fart joke guy. Like, it's just not my favorite thing. And
low humor.
It is. And it's so funny having gone from this, and then the movie I saw directly after this, minutes after I got out of this, was The Holdovers, which also had a funny fart joke in that too.
Incredible.
And so it's like going from one fart joke to another. But no, this scene, I mean, the entire time I was just squirming in my seat. I'm like,
very squirmy.
Leave, get out, leave, go away, go home, get out.
And he has many chances.
And then I'm like,
do it at any moment.
No. And then it's like
perfect timing.
I'm just sitting there, just like, my hands over my mouth and my fists are clean, and then the fart happened, and I had to hold my hand on my chest from how hard I was laughing in that moment.
I think it's really funny too, because like I can see, and I think this might be part of like this average Joe situation of like, if I put myself in Paul's shoes, I unfortunately do the same thing. Like I fart, and then I'm pretty sure after this, she goes to like unzip his pants and doesn't do anything. And she's like, "Did you just come?" And he's like, "Yeah, I gotta go." And like nothing happens. But for a guy in this situation, it's totally reasonable and understandable that he has kind of pressure cookered this idea and this situation of what might be happening. Really, really funny stuff. Dreams kind of deteriorates into nightmares, and we get a lot of interesting commentary again. I'm like, we don't know why this is happening. Is it this poisonous virality of his life now that what we see? Things kind of start to decimate a little bit. His wife loses out on some job opportunities, kind of gets cancel cultured and things like that. Then we get this big dream band commercial. And this is where Cousin Greg comes in. Did this work for you? Because it's a really hard satirical cut to like a product that allows essentially TikTok influencers to be in your dreams and sell you products in your dreams.
You know, when I saw the movie and this came up, it definitely was very jarring in the moment. It definitely caught me off guard. I wasn't exactly sure where this scene was going and how long it was going to go on and what have you. But I thought, again, with how the times are nowadays with social media influencers and what have you and the rise of them, I think it kind of worked for what was. I thought it worked, and
Yeah.
you know, it could have been a scene that easily went downhill. And I remember after my press screen, some people had walked out after the movie ended, talking about how they weren't exactly fond with how the movie incorporated this scene in the midst
Sure.
of everything. But I dug it. It was definitely a very bold thing to incorporate into the movie, but the way that they found a way of tackling, you know, cancel culture and all these other themes, I thought it fit for what the movie was trying to convey. And it's interesting too because, you know, before that entire thing happens, you know, you bring up how the dreams start turning into nightmares. Why are they turning into nightmares? We
Mhm.
have no idea. It is coincidental after he tried to do what he did with the assistant, and then that all fumbled, and then all of a sudden the dreams start deteriorating into nightmares. And then, like you said, his wife is losing job opportunities, and people are afraid to be around him. No one's showing up to his class.
Yeah.
His boss says you may have to step away from work for a while. The word loser is painted on his car, and it's honestly a very heartbreaking scene. Like, that's something very important to bring up too, because I thought this was going to be the over the top outburst moment that we always get in a Nicolas Cage movie, at least one of them. But this
Yeah.
was like a genuinely devastating scene because Paul throughout the movie comes off as a very down to earth guy, even though he was about to do something that was bad by essentially cheating on his wife. You could tell that he is innocent and he's a genuinely down to earth dude. And just to see this downfall of him was
Yeah.
so devastating to witness. And yeah, but you know, not to like change the subject too much and go to that specific scene. I liked it a lot. I thought it was a very, very strong addition to the movie, and
Yeah.
I can understand it being a situation where people watch the movie and aren't exactly enamored by this scene, but I thought it fit very well within this movie.
Yeah, again, like I know I said it, but Ari Aster coded to just do like a hard smash cut to a completely satirical product placement of a product that doesn't exist, which I think is funny as well.
Yeah.
And tackle things like cancel culture and commoditization and the kind of fame culture and fame addiction that a lot of people have. And I think Cousin Greg works great. Nicholas Braun is great in this movie. He previously in an A24 film, Zola, and he's great in that movie as well. And I will say, like, we got out of this movie, and I think the consensus between my wife and I was like, that was pretty good. Like, that was just that was a fun movie. It was good. I don't think it was like fantastic. I don't think it's like my personal top 10 of the year, but I liked it. I had a good time. And I bring this up because she then proceeded to be like, yeah, I didn't really like the Dream Band commercial. I think other than that, we were pretty good. And I was like, I think that was like the most important part of the movie. I think that
agree.
I think that was like the thematic tie-in of like what we're doing. And even though it might seem a little heavy-handed, I do think it works ultimately. And then we kind of get this, the end of the final act, if you will, of Paul's life is now different. He's been canceled. People have stopped dreaming about him. And of course, things happen in between there. We're not going to go into too much nitty gritty. But I think this at the very end is where we get the most sincere moments that did leave me wanting more of a character study of Paul
Right.
Matthews himself, of like, oh, I love this. I want to dive deeper into this. And again, like I
Mm-hmm.
recognize that would be a different film and a different movie and a
Yeah.
different narrative structure, but we get to see the materialization of a dream that him and his wife had kind of talked about prior in the movie of him donning the David Byrne big suit that we've seen previously this year in another A24 film and the remastering of Stop Making Sense, which is insane that they would have two movies out in the same year about
Oh
that.
my god, I know. I
But
know. And it was a
it
treat
works.
walking into this movie, not knowing that this was going to happen.
Yeah, I had no
Not
clue.
like there was no trailer out. Like I said, the only image was that shot of him just looking around and his car said loser painted on top of it. And walking into the movie and then just hearing about how she would dream of Paul in the David Byrne giant suit, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my god, what are the odds? Because literally the following day, they showed the IMAX restoration of Stop Making Sense with a
Oh,
Q&A
wow.
with all four talking heads. The hardest ticket to get at the festival. Could not get one myself,
I can
unfortunately.
imagine.
Um, but it was just so wild. And then
So funny.
to end the movie with him in the suit.
Yep.
I mean, it was so great. And like you said, it was a genuinely sincere moment because throughout the last third of the movie, the last, like, I would say 45 minutes of the movie, it was pretty intense. The comedy was really starting to fade away. It started getting
Yeah.
a lot more serious. But then you get this whole final act where he's been canceled and he's trying to sell his book. And they changed the title without telling him, too, which is a
Right.
really messed up. He wanted to call it Dream Scenario, but then they retitled it "I Am Your Nightmare" without his consent, and it's like, oh my god! And then he
Another
was
great meta commentary on
yeah,
like
and
what
then he was
happens.
doing that, and then he was doing that photo shoot where he looked like Freddy Krueger,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
was
yeah.
a nice touch as well. But that whole sequence where he kind of bids farewell to Janet, and like he obviously still loves her more than anything, and she has moved on,
Yeah.
but you get him using this dream travel tech to venture into one of her dreams, and he saves her life while wearing that suit, and it's just a beautiful note to conclude this movie. And he basically talks about how he wishes the dream was real, and then
Yeah.
he floats away, then the movie
It,
ends. That's it.
it's such a sweet and sad ending, and
It
I
really
will
is.
I'll do my true sentiment moment real quick because we're kind of circling it a little bit, and it's in between kind of these it's sandwiched in between of what we kind of just talked about. He goes to the house that Janet and his daughters live in now and kind of drops off his daughters, and we realize they're kind of separated and they're working on things, and he doesn't live there anymore. He says that he's going to be kind of doing I think he says he's going to be in Paris for like a week or 10
Yeah.
days, something to that effect. He talks to Janet and basically has this very heartfelt moment with her of trying to unearth and understand where things might have gone wrong, and really he is at the core of that and what might have happened to that. We get this like, and this happens in Sick of Myself as well. So if you were a fan of this moment, that movie is full of them. We get this very drawing moment of him talking to Janet and basically resolving some issues, hugging her. She tells him like, something to the fact of, I love you and I'm so glad you're in my life and these things. And then we get like a smash cut to realize that that was not happening. That is what Paul had wanted to happen or Janet had wanted to happen, and things were not actually turning out that way. And then we kind of get the dissolution of that scene in the reality. I think that very minuscule moment and that little nugget of like, God damn it, this is what it could have been, and you could have saved this. And even it was even possible to save it right then if you would maybe just have the balls to be a little bit more than an average guy that you have reverted kind of back into being. You could have saved your marriage. And I think that is right up my alley, and that is like totally for me. So that's my favorite part of the movie. But then to see that play out in the dream is also a really nice, like, kind of piece. Do you have a true cinema moment you want to share?
You know what? I really think it might be the ending. I really
Yeah.
think that might be my favorite moment of the entire movie. Yeah, there were so many moments throughout the movie where I laughed and had a great time watching it and everything, but I really appreciate how this took such a drastic turn and became a more intimate, raw film
Yeah.
and very depressing. And Um, I really just think that this ending is a beautiful bow on top to wrap up the movie. And I'm not gonna lie, throughout the whole movie, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna laugh the entire time. I'm sure I'm gonna be
Yeah.
on the edge of my seat, but like, I didn't think that I was gonna get teary eyed, and the ending just like really hit me a lot harder because again, like the movie started and he's just a normal down on his luck guy who, has a family who loves him and supports him and everything, and he has this run of the mill job, and then he becomes a household name, instant celebrity, and then that's all plummeted. Not only is his celebrity status plummeted, his entire life is plummeted, and you just want to just jump on screen and be like, "Oh, Paul,
My
man!"
guy. Yeah.
Like you just want to give him a hug. You just feel so
Yeah.
bad for him. But yeah, the ending is definitely my true cinema moment. It's one of my favorite endings of the entire year,
Yeah.
and it's one that I haven't stopped thinking about since I saw it at TIFF almost 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And the day where I get to hopefully see it again, hopefully soon, I can't wait to watch this ending over and over again because it really just it just hit me in the feels, Ethan. It really
Yeah.
got to me.
It is good, and I will say, like, visually, Nic Cage in the David Byrne suit is good. Is good
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
Like that
Oh
is
yeah.
it is funny, but it is also really sad and like just really just kind of a bummer to see like what ended up happening to him. Okay, we have two A1 acts we're gonna do. Of course, we're gonna do Nic Cage. I don't think we've had the pleasure of having him in an A24 film before, so this will be the first time. I've got a long list that I'll go through. It's not everything. But I'll quickly roll through that, and then we're gonna do movies about dreams as well. We have a much shorter list for that. But Bryan, feel free to go off list. You don't have to pick an A1 act that is on the long list or the short list here. But here's what we've got for Nic Cage. Of course, Dream Scenario we kind of just talked about. Face Off, Con Air, National Treasure, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Peggy Sue Got Married, Raising Arizona, Moonstruck, Wild at Heart, Red Rock West, Leaving Las Vegas, The Rock, Snake Eyes, 8mm, Bringing Out the Dead, Gone in 60 Seconds, The Family Man, Adaptation, Matchstick Men, Lord of War, The Weatherman, The Wicker Man, Ghost Rider, Grindhouse, National Treasure, Book of Secrets, Kick-Ass, The Croods, Mandy, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Prisoners of the Ghostland, Willy's Wonderland, Pig, we mentioned earlier on the show, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and Renfield. That's what I wanted to put on kind of the Nic Cage short list, long list, if you will. What is your favorite Nic Cage movie performance? What are you going to pick?
So I'm gonna actually pick Matchstick Men, which is a criminally underrated entry in Nicolas Cage's filmography. It's also a very criminally underrated Ridley Scott film.
Movie,
it's not the kind of film that you would expect Ridley Scott to direct. We're in the period where Ridley Scott has a new movie out in theaters right now, and if anyone out there is interested in checking out some of his more smaller titles, this is one that definitely needs a shout out. It's very hilarious. I mean, Nicolas Cage, he has his outbursts in this movie, and it's pretty fantastic, but it's also like a great father-daughter movie too, about con artists. And one of my favorite films of all time, actually my favorite film, and Ethan knows this, is Catch Me If You Can, which also follows a father and a child, dealing con artist stuff and what have you. So the fact that there's another one out there, it's pretty great. Now, Magic Man is awesome, but a close second for me would honestly be Adaptation, which I think is the best performance that Nicolas Cage has ever done. It's kind of criminal that he didn't win an Oscar for this, but
it is,
especially considering that he played two characters and everything. And that's a hard thing to pull off. But yeah, Matchstick Man definitely needs way more attention, and it's crazy. It's a 20-year-old movie. It's crazy that it's 20 years old this year. Like, it's absolutely nuts.
Yeah, Matchstick Man, I believe, is on the Criterion Channel right now. So if you have the Criterion Channel, you can watch it. They kind of have a con artist little theme package going on with Matchstick Men in there. And I watched the trailer for their kind of con artist theme last night, and I was like, ooh, Matchstick Men, there's a movie I haven't seen in a while that's really good. So yeah, I might revisit that. I like Matchstick Men. I think that's a great call out for sure.
Yeah.
Personally enjoy that far more than Napoleon. I don't know how you feel about Napoleon.
If that's 100%, 100%.
But it is really good. Adaptation, you talked about, and I totally agree with you. I think it is his best movie, probably. At least like kind of peak Cage before we started to get into this renaissance.
Mhm.
I would have to go with, and I know he's got like a lot of things in there, and he's got such an interesting kind of career, but I love Pig. I think he
Yeah.
is so different in Pig, and I think he works hard to do that and to do it successfully.
Yeah.
That something clicks about that movie, and something is special that he is able to kind of tap into that he doesn't get the chance to do with Willy's Wonderland or like The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Like some of these newer movies just don't see him in that role, and with that kind of energy. So, yeah, highly recommend Pig for sure. Movies about dreams, of course, Dream Scenario. And this is a short list, so I'm sure we're leaving off a lot of potential picks out there. A Nightmare on Elm Street, Inception, Dreamscape, The Wizard of Oz, Last Night in Soho, The Cell, The Science of Sleep, and then I put Vanilla Sky and Eyes Wide Shut because they're kind of dream adjacent. They're not like dream scenario version, but they are pretty close. I'll let you go first again, Brian, because I gotta figure out what I'm going with, to be honest with you.
Yeah, this is a very tough subgenre to figure out what your favorite
It is,
of
yeah.
it is. But if I'm being honest, my favorite film in this list that you put is The Wizard of Oz because I mean, it's The Wizard of Oz. What can you say that hasn't been said already? It's one of the most influential films of all time, and it's one of the best films ever made. And it's funny because I've always loved this movie, but when I got older, I was worried that I wasn't going to appreciate this movie as much when I got older because I was thinking to myself,
Yeah.
oh, it's just a movie for kids. It's just a family movie. But it's one of those situations where my appreciation grew exponentially the more I watched it, even as an adult. I like it way more now as someone in their mid
Mm,
20s than I did when I watched it when I was like 8 years old. Granted, I was petrified watching this when I was a kid, and I
sure.
would always, and I don't know. I just think that when you think of movies about dreams and everything, that's like a go-to one, and I really think that that's the quintessential movie about dreams. It may not be the one people think about the most, but it's
Yeah.
I think it's the one for me.
I think probably the one that I would assume people think of the most is Inception. I think that's like the
Yeah.
most dream core like movie
Right.
you could put on this list, and I do
Yeah.
love Inception. I don't think this is a great movie. It might not even be a good movie, but I fucking love this movie. I'm going with Vanilla Sky, and again, like this is dream adjacent a little bit, like Another Life, and like this kind of like reality and sub-reality and these other
Mhm.
sub aspects of what kind of pieces this movie together.
Yeah.
I think Tom Cruise is quite good in this movie, and I think it is just and I know it's an adaptation from a or like a remake of a foreign film, but I think it's like just weird enough, and like Cameron Diaz is just bad enough, and like Tom Cruise is just hot enough, and like Penelope Cruz is just hot enough, and like the Paul McCartney song is just good enough. Like I just think all the pieces work really well for me, and that's probably a hot take to be like, oh, I love Vanilla Sky because it's like a very average film, and it's very flawed. But in the context of like movies about dreams, this is definitely like without a doubt my pick. I love Vanilla Sky. I watched it as a young gun, and it's stuck with me ever since.
Yeah, Vanilla Sky is a very interesting one for sure. It's one that I haven't seen in a very hot minute, but
Yeah,
I do remember that when I did watch it, I was just so perplexed by what I had just watched and
it's
everything.
so
I'm just
weird.
like, it's so weird. It's so
Yeah.
bizarre. And this was Cameron Crowe's follow up to Almost Famous, so it's very interesting
Oh,
that he
interesting.
went
Okay, yeah.
from this to that, and a scene that will always haunt me till the end of the time. And I think it's in this movie, if I'm not mistaken, is the sequence where Tom Cruise is walking around New York saying Times Square is just empty. It's
It's sick.
empty.
Yeah, fucking awesome.
And just hearing about how they had a whole day to shoot that scene.
Hmm.
Like imagine Times Square is just shut down. Like that's the most populated part of New York City.
I just don't think you
And
can make a movie like that
uh,
anymore.
oh, absolutely not. Like the perfect time to make a movie where you go to Times Square where it's empty was during COVID where nobody
Yeah.
was in the city.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is the classic, like they don't make them like they used to. Okay, A24 ranking, and then we'll get out of here. You can choose A through F 24, you can add a plus, you can add a minus. What would you give Dream Scenario?
I'm gonna go A24 on this one. I was
Ooh.
very, very positive on this one. I really, really loved it. Like I said at the top, I had a few narrative issues with it, and I agree with you, Ethan. I definitely would have liked a little bit more time on this movie. Not that I don't appreciate a short runtime like this.
Sure.
This was a pretty short film and everything, and it flew by. It went by very quickly. Not an ounce of fat to be found. But I would have liked maybe just 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes more. Hell, I would have been fine if this was a little over 2 hours. I would have been fine with it. I was already so into the movie at that point. But
Mhm.
yeah, one of my favorites of the year. Again, it's not in my top 10 of the year. It's right outside my top 10 of the year. And A24 has had quite a few strong contenders this year in terms of like great films. But this would probably be in my top 5 A24 films of the year. And it's
Okay.
right outside my top 10. I really enjoyed this. So yeah, A24 for me.
I love that. I love that for you. And I don't think you're wrong at all. I think there's a lot of like merit to this movie. I do think it spreads a little thin. Like I think it tries to talk about a lot of things and it does move on quickly. I think that is one of its bigger faults is that it does move so quickly and so fast, like through what we're maybe identifying and trying to figure out. But again, like this is not a character study. This is not a very intense, in-depth kind of story about that. So I think for what it is very good and entertaining. I'm gonna go with a just a solid B24. I think it's really good. I don't think it's fantastic. But I do see myself wanting to revisit this and like when I own it and when eventually, hopefully it'll come out on physical media to kind of, come full circle, like I will pop it in. I will totally watch it. I think the short runtime is a big benefit in that idea. And I think there's a lot of things to like about this movie. And I just think it's a great addition to the A24 catalog. I don't know if you can really reach the heights of maybe what their A plus material is anymore. I think it takes a lot to get there. And we might even be kind of graduating like past that, moving past that season of A24. But I think for what it is good. And, I think it's a big year for A24, right? Like Beau's Afraid, Past Lives, Dream Scenario. I think there's a lot of cool stuff out there that is pretty big. And like, again, I think this is coming out at the right time. I'd be very curious to see what this does box office once it goes wide and hopefully hits 2,500 screens or 3,000 screens nationwide. But I do think it's a really good movie to enjoy. Next week on the show, we're going to be back talking about The Curse. We talked about the very first episode of The Curse a few weeks ago. When we come back next week, we're going to be talking about episodes 2 through 5. Now, we kind of did the same structure with a show called Irma Vep, and that is on Max, and that is an excellent A24 show if you're looking for something a little bit more obscure, a foreign show as well. So we'll do episodes 2 through 5 of The Curse. That means that episode next week will actually be dropping on a Saturday instead of a Friday because Ben and I are just average Joes, just, your average Paul Matthews over here that has to watch The Curse just the same as everybody else. So we'll be watching The Curse on Friday. We'll record on Friday. We'll get the episode out on Saturday. Bryan, I want to thank you for coming in, stepping in for Ben. Big shoes to fill. Big shoes, Succession style. But I appreciate you, and I love talking to you, man. I can't wait to have you back on the show. And any future endeavors that we might share together. Thanks for being here, man.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Ethan. Such a blast getting to talk about this movie with you tonight.
Of course, dude. Yeah, and I look forward to having you back. What are your thoughts on Dream Scenario? Let us know on Twitter or Instagram. We're at 24 Minutes of A24. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can actually watch our conversation on the big screen or on the little screen or on the tablet screen, wherever you want to watch your YouTube. You can also support the show by becoming a Patreon member. We are covering Ridley Scott movies right now, and we actually just released an episode about House of Gucci. Where are you at on House of Gucci, Bryan?
I'm very mixed on it. It's entertaining, but
man, I didn't want to end the pod on a sour note, but look, here we are. I love House of Gucci, man.
It's there's a lot of great moments to it. Not gonna lie, the Why Cousin Why is extraordinary, but I don't know.
It's-
I don't hate it like some people do, but I don't love it either. I've had no desire for going back to watch it. When I saw it in the theater,
Okay.
I was like, "Damn, this is pretty entertaining," but no desire of going back to it.
That's fair. Well, Ben and I talk about the House of Gucci in 24 minutes, and we've got some thoughts, and so that's definitely worth checking out. We're going to be talking about Napoleon next week on the Patreon, and then we're tackling Michael Mann. So be sure to go check that out and support the show. Bryan, thanks again for being on the pod. I am Ethan Simi. Spring break forever, bitches.